Well, I think for most of us, there's usually like 5 questions that we all ask in life to try to figure out what life's all about. And I think the first question that most of us ask is, what is my purpose? You know, God designed each and every one of us with a predestined life. And what we mean by that is that each person God created special and different and unique. Everything that God put together on this planet, everything that He put in the heavens, all has a specific purpose that He had in mind. How He wanted it to, how he designed it and how it was supposed to function. And oftentimes when going through life, sometimes life doesn't seem to function very well. And so that question is, well, why am I even here? What's my purpose? And so I think to understand that first, we have to go back to our Creator, go back to our source, and get an understanding that he specifically designed each and every one of us for a special purpose. You know, there's nothing that exists that God created that doesn't have a predestined purpose. And so every human was created to live life with meaning and purpose. And until you discover your personal reason for living, you will tend to be frustrated in life. I mean, how many times have you, as you're going through life and you come across, you stumble across issues in life, it gets difficult. And if we don't understand why I'm here and what my purpose is, oftentimes it can be very frustrating. And people we see all around us live frustrating lives. Another thing is that you'll get tired, you get worn out. Because when purpose is unknown, abuse is inevitable. And when there's abuse, when we live lives that are abused and not working and operating the way that God designed it, it wears us out. We're not able to rest. We don't sleep well. We're not functioning properly. If you think inside of the Fords, when they created the car back in the 1900s, that car was designed to operate in a certain way. The way it was designed, the way it was created, and every piece of it that got put together was for a specific idea in mind. And if that car is not used for what it was made for, well, it doesn't function correctly. We call that dysfunction. And that's what we see in our lives a lot of times when we don't have a clear understanding of purpose. Another thing that will happen in life when we don't understand purpose is that we become dissatisfied with life. And we see people that are just ready, they're tired, they're exhausted, you'll hear the term, I'm at the end of my rope. And I think that we see a lot of people in life today that don't have that, and they are at the end of their ropes. They don't know where to go, where to turn. And so we turn to things that are that bring satisfaction, but it's pseudo-satisfaction. It's not real. It's not the way we're designed. And so we see that we're dysfunctioning, and we need to figure out what's the problem. So coming to that first and initial question, what is my purpose, is very, very important to make sure that we do function the way God created us. What is source? Well, let me define source for you. Source is the origin of a person or a thing. In other words, where did it come from? Oftentimes, in talking with people, they often get confused with what that looks like. And there's different contexts when we're talking about source. You know, I've come from my parents, or I've come from America, I come from China. We kind of think of our origins in that way. But for the purposes of the study, we're looking at our source as our original source. And that source is God Himself. He's the one that designed me, He's the one that created me. So He Himself is my source. And we have to get to that point of understanding who our source is. Because sometimes it gets as simple as thinking my source is my ability to make money, or my ability to make things happen. And we oftentimes don't go through life thinking that there's someone who has a plan for my life, and if I'm not going according to that plan, I'm not following what my source is telling me to do. Now, what is a Bitterroot judgment? A Bitterroot judgment is something like, basically, it's a condemning judgment that I've made about God or other people. It's It's typically lodged in my heart. It's something that's there. It's like this thing where I'm withholding forgiveness. I've made a judgment about you, and I no longer am thinking correctly. I have this false idea in my mind about you. It's a lot of times it's repressed. Those judgments are repressed. They're not made known. They're not unveiled because it's my own personal thoughts. It's not something that I share with you because I want you to have a different look of me, a different view of me, I should say. So basically, a Bitterroot judgment is unforgiveness that I have towards someone based on something that they've done to hurt me or to wound me. Now, honor is an important word to understand as well. Oftentimes we watch movies or we read books that talk about honor, about people's accomplishments or what have you. And it's how we feel about that person, and that's important. But when we're thinking about Hebraic thought on how God sees things and what he was telling the children of Israel when he was giving them the commandments, in the 5th commandment says, honor your mother and father, is the basic commandment in itself. And there's a lot of implications there, and there's a lot of struggles that some people have with that, because not all of our parents at times or our caretakers, the people who are over us in leadership, sometimes they're not really honorable in our definition of honor. And so we sometimes get stuck on that word, honor. What does that mean to honor someone, even when they're not treating us in an honorable way? But the Hebraic thought there, and the word that's used in Hebrew is chabed, is how you pronounce that word. And the idea of that word means to be heavy, or it suggests the sense of to give weight to. So honor is to give weight to someone. So for me to honor my mother and father, for me to honor someone who is over me, is to understand that God's put them in there for a purpose. For instance, my parents, they gave birth to me, and they are there. God's put them in my life to help me find my way to understanding God and his plans and purposes of my life. And so that's the same way that we need to be thoughtful when we think about honoring people. Is, do we give weight to them? Do we honor them and see them as important people in our lives? One of the other questions that oftentimes are asked are the question about who am I? I hear that a lot in our counseling sessions and some of our teaching sessions. And what people are really asking when they say who am I, they're trying to figure out their identity. And when I talk about the word identity, when we talk about who am I, that's a question that is important to understand, because if I don't know my identity, if I don't know that simple truth, it's kind of hard to understand what my purpose is too. So those two things kind of go hand in hand. And identity is not just about my nationality. It's not just about my family of origin. It's much bigger than that. It really speaks to the reason why I was created, and more importantly, to whom I belong to. So my identity is tied to my source. My identity is tied to my Creator, and what his plans and purposes are for me, and how he's created me, and what he wants me to do in my life. Now, fear. This can be a tough one. Oftentimes when we hear the word fear, we tie it with horror, or we tie it with, when you think about when you're a kid and the lights go out at night and you're there and you're wondering if the boogeyman's under your door or under your bed. We often tie fear more into things that are kind of scary or frightening. And in defining the word fear and what we're trying to communicate here, fear is really, if I was to put it in simple terms, it's the absence of love. It's a strong emotion that we all experience from time to time. And that strong emotion is an emotion that I contend with when love is withheld, or it's not experienced as a result of broken relationships. And so when Paul talked about it in 1 John, one of the things that he says, perfect love casts out all fear. In other words, when love is present, I don't have a lot to fear because I know that love will sustain me, that love will uphold me, that love will take care of me. So fear is a strong emotion that we all deal with, and we have to really be able to define what that means correctly to kind of know even how to deal with fear. Yeah, that's another question that a lot of people ask me is, David, what am I built for? What is it that I can do to change the world? What is it that I can do that's going to affect those around me? My community, my part of the world. And really what they're asking is, what is my potential? In talking about that, when we're trying to define potential, in other words, what is it that I can do? I have a mentor of mine. His name is Miles Monroe. He asked that question to God one day. He asked, and it was more defined like this. He says, God, where do we find all the treasures in this earth? In other words, when we're looking for the potential of what can be done on this earth, where do we find all those treasures? Where are they found? Where are you hidden them? Are they out here, out in the open? And he said that the answer he felt like he got back from God was a little strange in a sense, because God said, most men look for potential in the things that I've created. They think that there's these huge treasures, these huge stockpiles of wealth in diamond mines and in gold mines and in the New York Stock Exchange and the Federal Reserve, all these places where there's stuff that help us get to our potential, that serve us as tools in finding our potential. But the reality is the potential is found in man. And one of the greatest places where there's a lot of treasures that are hidden are in the graveyards. And Miles was kind of questioning. He's like, well, what does that mean, treasures in the graveyard? He says, yeah, there's a lot of people who died prematurely, not understanding their purpose, not understanding the potential that I'd given them. And they didn't die empty. They died full. There was a lot of stuff that I had placed within them that they had never really had realized and been able to offer to other people. And so when we think about what does potential mean, and how do I find my potential, it's inside us. God put it inside us. And so our spirit has to be able to connect with His Spirit. We have to have the mind of Christ. And for us to be able to do that, we have to be thinking correctly. We have to be able to understand that thinking with a natural mind won't help us with our potential. We have to be more heavenly minded. We have to be well connected with our source, so that He can help us understand that our potential is great. So that's one of the things that I've kind of purposed in my heart, is to live a long life, or at least to die empty. So what keeps us from living out our true identity? It's important to understand that. What is it that keeps us from being who we truly are, that real me, that person that God designed me to be? I think it's important for us to understand that anything that is not in alignment with the way God thinks, with what His Word says and what He has told us, is sin. And sin is basically a violation of design. It could be described as anything that does not align itself with the will and purposes of God. So man without Christ at the center leads to a violation of design, and we're not following our purposes the way that He wants us to. We're not following His will. It's our will, not His will, being done here. So if we take the scripture in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 3 and 6, it says this, it says, "For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh, for the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but divinely powerful for the destruction of fortresses. We are destroying speculations and every lofty thing that is raised up against the knowledge of God, and we are taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ." Now, when you think about that verse, we have to understand that it's talking about our thought life, on how we process, how we think, what we allow into our minds. And the thought life that is not in alignment with God and His ways is demonic in nature, and demonic activity is attracted to the thought processes of every man, woman, and child. So aligning with this thought life becomes an avenue of partnership, or you could say there are agreements that we make with these false entities, with these false beliefs, with these demonic ideas. And it's in the unseen realm, and it's keeping us from fulfilling our purpose and our destiny. It's keeping us from being the real you, the real me, and that's not what God wants. So why is it important to understand what the 4 spiritual laws are? You might think to yourself, well, didn't God give us 10 commandments? And I'd say, yeah, He did. But Jesus kind of took those 10 commandments and brought them down to 2 very important commandments. To honor the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your strength is the first, and the second one's like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. So if you were to take all of God's law and His commandments and just get down to the nitty-gritty of it, you're probably talking about really what is it that we should do according to God's law that stops us from sinning and violating love against God and against other people. And that's kind of what Jesus was talking about. But Lauren Sanford, when he talked about the 4 spiritual laws, he kind of gave us an understanding of 4 laws that adversely affect our lives to a greater degree than maybe some of the other laws that we tend to talk about. Not that they're more important, but they affect our lives and the lives of those around us at such a more deeper level. So the first one he talks about is honor your father and mother. And in Deuteronomy 5:16 it says, "Honor your father and mother as the Lord your God has commanded you, that your days may be prolonged and that it may go well with you on the land which the Lord your God has given you." And the idea behind that is the fact that, we talked about honor in the definition of honor earlier, and it's that we want to give weight to these people because specifically our mother and father are the ones who brought us into this world. And in the Hebrew mindset and the Hebrew thought, a mother and father are important for many things, but one of the most important things is they're the ones that point us towards God. So to dishonor our mother and father really affects us throughout our whole life if we're not abiding by that law. The second one, do not judge lest you be judged yourselves. Matthew 7 verses 1 through 2 says, "For in the way you judge you will be judged, and by your standard or measure it should be measured to you." And the ideal there is that we're not really valuing people the way God values them. We're judging them based on our standards, not on the higher standard that God has. And so there's no room for grace, there's no room for mercy, and there's a violation of that person and their identity and their purpose and their potential in life as well. And it causes conflict when we're judging others. And the reality there is that we're judging ourselves because we're showing our true character. We're showing our inability to love well. So we have to be careful on that one as well. Now the third law goes like this: "For whatsoever a man sows, this he will also reap." In Galatians 6:7 through 8, it says, "Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man sows, that will he also reap. For he who sows to his flesh will of the flesh reap corruption, but he who sows to the Spirit will of the Spirit reap everlasting life." the ideal behind sowing and reaping is whatever you put into a thing, that's what you're going to get out of it. So if you're sowing love, if you're sowing seeds of love, there's going to be a reward or a reaping of love. If you're sowing things of the flesh, if you're sowing things, you're trying to control people, you're trying to manipulate people, well, you're going to reap those same things back on yourself. And that's something that's very detrimental to you and your life, but also to those others around you. And then the fourth law, the fourth spiritual law is, for you who judge, practice the same things. In other words, it's kind of like the verse where Jesus talked about, before you want to get the speck out of your brother's eye, get the beam out of your eye. Oftentimes, the things that we see in others are the things we don't like about ourselves. And as we understand judgments and the implication of when we make judgments on other people, and realize that we do those very same things, we're holding other people to a higher standard that we hold ourselves to. And last time I looked, that's not really good for relationship building. And so it's important that that we keep the standard that God has for us in our lives, and we give people the grace and the ability to, when they do make mistakes, they don't stay to that standard, that we don't hold it against them, that we're able to release them and then encourage them to step it up. So instead of judging, we want to be able to encourage people and give them the courage to stand taller next go around. So where do Bitterroot Judgments come from? Well, to put it in a nutshell, they're the results of our sinful reactions to hurt and pain that we've experienced in life. In other words, when pain has come to our life, when we've been rejected, we've felt unimportant in someone's life, when someone has sinned against us, those Bitterroot Judgments, they come out of our sinful reactions. In other words, how we react to things that happen to us in life. They're critical and condemning judgments that we have for other people, things that we see in their lives. And when we're not at the right place in our lives, it's most of the time we're trying to get the focus off of us, and we want to get it on someone else. So if you look worse than me, well, then I'm just going to condemn you and judge you, and more than likely I'll feel better about myself. And then also the refusal or inability to forgive someone that has hurt us. And we know, as Jesus, when he taught us how to pray, he taught us, he told us that it's important for us to forgive the trespasses of others, just like Jesus has forgiven us of our trespasses. And so it's important that we learn to release them, because when we don't, then all we're doing is we're not only putting them in bondage, but we're putting ourselves in bondage to these judgments. Now, how do these judgments negatively affect you and me, spiritually, emotionally, and relationally? How do they affect our well-being and being whole as people? Well, basically, these judgments, they cause separation between us and God, as well as separation between those that are in our lives. When things happen, when we aren't able to resolve conflict, when we're not able to work through the pain of life, things that people have done to us, well, that unforgiveness will keep us from experiencing real relationships, intimate relationships. A lot of us, we know what it looks like to have what I like to call pseudo relationships. They're just kind of false relationships. They're based on how I want to appear to you and how you want me to appear, how you want me to see you. And oftentimes we think that everything has to look good. But the reality in intimate relationships, we see the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so in order to have those intimate relationships, not only with God, but with other people, and with ourselves, we have to learn to forgive. So one of the things that we don't want to do is get trapped in the shame and fear and control cycle, which I like to call it, where it's just this constant cycle of dealing with pain well, I should say, not dealing with pain, and so there's shame, there's condemnation that comes into our own lives. Then there's the fear, because we get this sense of that when people really see me for who I am, they're not going to love me. And so in order to do that, we try to control things, and we get into that cycle. And then what happens is we tend to live life with a deep sense of aloneness. And none of us want to live in that place of aloneness. God said in Genesis 2, verses 18, he said, it's not good for man to be alone. He created us for community. He created us for relationship, and even at the deep, intimate levels, not only with him, but with each other. Now, in talking about sonship, you might ask the question, well, what are some of the things that keep us from living and understanding and having the heart of a son when it comes to our relationship with God? Even when it comes to a relationship with our earthly parents, our earthly caretakers. And I find that there's these 4 thoughts that I have anyway that are things that hinders, that keep us from being able to experience what it means to be a son. And when we're talking about sons, we're talking about coming to a mature level of knowing how to rest in God's love, knowing how to rest in the love of those who are around us, and our family members, our spouses, our parents, our siblings. And so a couple of those hindrances, one of them is that we find great difficulty in receiving love and acceptance and admonition from God and others. And oftentimes that's due to some of the pain that we've not dealt with in the past, some of the judges that we still may carry about ourselves or others. Secondly, we tend to develop this independent attitude, which basically the message behind that independent attitude is, I don't need you. And so I'll just take care of it myself. And that puts us back into that state of aloneness. We don't ever get a sense of being able to rest in God's love, or to be able to rest in the embrace of someone who cares for us and wants to have intimate relationship with us. Thirdly, we lose the ability to trust in authority, because our view of God and his Father, him being our Father, the view of our earthly parents, or those who are in a caretaker position over us, it could even be a pastor or a boss or someone who is an authority over us. We lose the ability to trust them, and so that's a great hindrance in being able to be able to rest and knowing what it means to live like a son and a daughter of God. And then fourthly, but not lastly, we begin to start distancing ourselves in our relationships. We start having these superficial relationships, and we only portray the things that we want people to see. And that gets down into control, of trying to control how they see us and what they think about us. And that's never a good thing, because then we never really get to experience what it's like to have deep, meaningful, intimate relationships with God and with others, and which again takes us back to this place of aloneness, which is not a good place to be.